Welcome to The Criminologist, the podcast dedicated to educating and entertaining our listeners. This week, bringing you a special American Probation and Parole Association edition. As the voice of the community corrections industry, APPA serves as the field's leading professional membership association. In addition to their U.S. members, the American Probation and Parole Association is supported by international members who are actively involved in strengthening community corrections work in their own countries. APPA's International Relations Committee aims to connect community corrections professionals around the world to inspire and share insights from their unique experiences and best practices. Welcome to this special APPA episode of The Criminologist. And now, welcome your host, Joseph Arvidson.
Hello, and welcome to episode 195 of the Criminologist podcast. Happy to have you all with us today. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a very special edition of the Criminologist podcast. I'm your host, Joseph Arvidson, and today we are embarking on a unique journey into partnership with the American Probation and Parole Association, particularly their International Relations Committee. This week, we have something extraordinary in store for you. We'll be bringing you a very special interview with a distinguished guest who hails from Nairobi, Kenya. It's a conversation that transcends borders and showcases the global impact of community corrections and criminal justice reform. We are committed to bringing you more of these unique and enlightening special edition episodes in the future. So stay tuned for more international insights and collaborations. But before we dive into this captivating conversation, let me provide a bit of context for those who might be new to the American Probation and Parole Association. APPA is the voice of the community corrections industry, a leading professional membership association that plays a pivotal role in strengthening community corrections work. With thousands of passionate members across the United States and other countries, APPA is dedicated to enhancing the field and reducing recidivism to make our communities safe. APPA's membership includes a diverse range of individuals and organizations, from community corrections professionals and service providers to researchers, educators, and concerned citizens. Their collective efforts are focused on one common goal: advancing the role of the community corrections industry. And now, the moment we've all been waiting for. Our special guest today is none other than Nancy Nungari, a senior probation officer based in Nairobi, Kenya. Nancy brings a wealth of experience and insights into the assessment, treatment, rehabilitation, and reintegration of justice-involved individuals. Her work is a testament to the global impact of community corrections and the power of collaboration. Please join me in this enlightening conversation as we explore the incredible work being done by our international partners and gain valuable insights in the world of community corrections from Nairobi and beyond. Stay tuned for an inspiring and eye-opening episode. And now, without further ado, let's dive into my conversation with Nancy Nungari. And I will see you all on the other side. Well, hello, Nancy. Welcome to the Criminologist podcast. I'm so glad we connected and that you're able to be a part of this experience, reaching out to us today all the way from Nairobi, Kenya. Nancy, why don't we start out by you simply introducing yourself to the audience, but also telling us perhaps a little bit about your background, what your pathway was like, what your journey was like, which ended up with you working in your current role as a senior probation manager. I ask this question because a lot of listeners always wonder what it's like to get into the field of probation. And as you and I both know, there are a variety of pathways for folks to end up in the field. So if you could, yes, introduce yourself and also perhaps illuminate a little bit of what your pathway into the field looked like.
Wow, thank you so much. I'm very delighted to be here and for the opportunity to have this conversation and, of course, share my perspectives as a psychologist and as a criminal justice practitioner based in Nairobi. And first and foremost, I must say your podcast has given me a great opportunity to learn from you, but also from the experts that you featured and my global colleagues. So I feel like through your podcast, I've traveled to Romania, to Ukraine, to Australia, to the UK, and to various parts of the US, and gotten to gain a lot of insights from the experiences and also from the knowledge of the greater international community in criminal justice sector. And also, in addition to that, you feature a lot of people with lived experiences, from the justice sector. And that has given me a real insight into how our clients experience us, and also really anchored my belief that we need a trauma-informed perspective when we work in the criminal justice system, of course. So I'm really, really honored to be here. So as you mentioned, my name is Nancy Nungari, and I'm a senior probation officer based in Nairobi, Kenya. I've been working in the criminal justice sector for 14 years. And my background in psychology, I have a BA in psychology, an MA in psychology, and right now I'm finalizing my clinical psychology PhD program. So I came to corrections from a psychology background. And when I came to corrections, I've worked in the field offices, offering direct services to clients, assessments, treatment programs, one-on-one, group programs, family programs. And then I've also trained colleagues in corrections, in motivational interviewing, also in interventions. And then I had the honor of joining project management teams to work in, capacity building projects that were supported by our development partners. And right now, my current role, I'm working on social crime prevention within our organization. So it's been quite the journey, moving from psychology and then getting into corrections and loving working with clients. Yes.
Well, thank you so much for those kind words, Nancy. That warms my heart. Mm-hmm. That really is the goal of the podcast, as you just articulated, is to not only bring people together, but hopefully shine a light and show that these core correctional skills, this body of knowledge around what works, are now understood globally, not just in our little corner of the world or our specific jurisdiction. And yes, everything you just said endorses my belief in what we're doing and that we're on the right track here. So let's unpack some of that really great stuff you talked about. Mm-hmm. Maybe start out with, I like pointing out to the listeners, as I just said, those common denominators around the world in the field of probation and parole. You just mentioned motivational interviewing, for example. My listeners know I come from a pretty heavy assessment background. So maybe shine a light on what that looks like from your perspective, that assessment process for example, newly sentenced people or newly admitted individuals into the correctional system, and how from that assessment you link that to their treatment planning.
All right, that's a good question, because within community corrections, the assessment process begins with comprehensive interviews. We interview the client, of course, the significant others. What we are seeking for is to get a good background and context of their life, their school, their work, their relationships, multiple domains so that we get to understand the context in which the offending behavior occurred. And then we proceed to understanding and delving deep into the criminogenic needs, the factors that are driving the offending behavior, using tools that are based on the Risk-Need-Responsivity model. And we realize that our clients have multiple pressing needs more often than not. And so our treatment has to be very focused on the criminogenic ones. So we zero in on those ones because our resources are limited, our time is limited with them, and we want to have the best outcome after their time in the correctional system. So after that, we do treatment planning, and based on your needs, then you're placed in programs, whether it's formal education or vocational training or behavior treatment programs, whichever program addresses the identified criminogenic need. So that's how our process looked like. And of course, MI plays into this because first, it's a way of talking with our clients in a more collaborative way. And justice involved individuals sometimes have this adversarial outlook or experience. So motivational interviewing is really a way that brings out the conversation in a very collaborative way, in a way that this person feels respected and valued as a person, and they're able to open up and you're able to collect information, because we need this accurate information in order to move forward in the process, and also provides for us a way to talk about change. As you know, change is really difficult, even for the rest of us who are not justice involved. Just think, when you want to adopt a good, healthy habit, it's really hard to get going as an individual. How more difficult it is for the justice involved person who needs to change maybe a bigger behavior with consequences that are not good for them. So motivational interviewing provides a really good way to talk about change that normalizes issues like ambivalence and, resistance and the natural stages that change evolves through until you get to where you want to. So that's basically what our process looks like here.
Can you maybe share some of how the United Nations standard minimum rules are implemented over in your jurisdiction there? I know one thing that we talk about, again, is sort of that inconsistency or, the fact that we're not all on the same page. When I was in New York City last year for the American Probation and Parole Association, we talked about this fact that you could look at other vocations, other professions, and most of them, the vast majority, have at least some sort of minimum standards or a credentialing process, whether it's the individual who works on my automobile or the electrician who comes into my home, or certainly my doctor or my lawyer. They all have some recognized, as I said, credential. And we were having a good conversation around the fact that that's not the case in probation, at least not here in the United States. It's just more of a freelance, supervise as you believe is best based on your own anecdotal observation. So I'm delighted to see any efforts towards formalizing, for lack of a better term, those best practices. So to what degree does the United Nations standard minimum rules address that issue that I've just described?
Yeah, I think that's a very good observations about our training, our standardization. I think it's the same here also, basically Global South and maybe East Africa region. We have the same experience where we don't have one standardized training joining corrections. And I think it's really critical that correction services start investing in that, definitely. And I think the United Nations standard minimum rules provide a very good way to standardize practice across, different countries, different jurisdictions. And when you look at the principles like individualized treatment, assessment and classification, the respect for, dignity, not discrimination, and community involvement. So these principles are what we apply also. Minimum intervention, protecting vulnerable groups, with specific to especially women and children who are justice involved, otherwise known as juveniles, and having this duty of care and prohibiting torture and cruel treatment. So all these principles, they guide our work. And I think as training has continued to be rolled out, they've been very well embraced and applied within our system. So I'm really happy for that is the context in which we are practicing.
Nancy, when you were describing your background, I made note of the fact that you have a psychology background, which I find fascinating. I think we need more of that in the field of probation. Can you talk about how you've leveraged your psychology background in your work with probation to be a more effective change agent, if you will?
Yeah, most definitely I can. Thank you so much for asking. I think my psychology background has given me critical tools in my work with justice-involved children and adults, because it's provided for me a lens through which I understand offending behavior, the process of change, and also my role in facilitating individual and also collective transformation. So I can highlight 3 ways in which my psychology background has really helped me as a justice practitioner. One, it has given me empathy, a very compassionate and client-centered approach to understanding and working with my clients. And this has also deepened my understanding and respect for client self-efficacy, because our clients have the capacity for choice, they have the capacity for self-direction, and I firmly have gotten the belief that clients have the agency, as we all do, to change our lives, when we have the right support. And that's where our role comes in as correctional officers, to provide the support that the clients need to make the choices and effect changes in their lives. And also this compassionate approach has also given me a deep respect for human rights, because human rights, I believe, is based on the fundamental ability to separate the person from their behavior. So you see them first and foremost as a human being, not just what they have done, no matter how bad it is. And this helps me to safeguard their inherent dignity and value as a person, which means that when the justice system takes away their right to liberty, every other right, as of course enshrined in the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, remains. And as a correctional practitioner, of course, I have a duty, we all do, to observe that human right. And secondly, my background in psychology has given me a strong foundation on CBT, cognitive behavior therapies, and social learning models, which have been shown by research to be most effective in our work with clients. They produce the best results in terms of lowering reoffending behavior. So it's given me a framework for understanding personal transformation, how our thoughts feed into our feelings and into behavior. And CBT is a great way to help clients restructure their thinking patterns and also support prosocial attitudes, choices, behavior, and overall prosocial lifestyle. So my psychology background has provided me the framework to help clients understand how pro-criminal thinking, justifications, neutralizations, the rationalizations that clients come with, can lead to increasingly criminal conduct, and given me the tools to help them to restructure their thoughts and feelings so that they are moving towards prosocial behavior. And thirdly, and I think most importantly for me, my psychology background has given me a trauma-informed perspective, a deep appreciation into how trauma changes the brain and directly impacts our thinking, our emotions, and our behavior. And I've become very interested also in neurocriminology as a result of that tie and link. And when I look at our justice system, globally and also in Africa and in the global South, I think the trauma-informed perspectives helps me a lot in 3 ways. The first way, it helps me in how I understand my clients' criminal behavior. Because when you look at our clients in the criminal justice system, you realize there's plenty of trauma in their background. Our clients come from very unsafe families, unsafe community contexts. There's abuse, there's neglect, there's violence. And if you look at the context of Africa, there's a lot of violence and threats as in our communities and family systems. So our clients are not safe. So it's not wonder that this person is dysregulated and their survival kicks in, and survival responses and behaviors kick in. Their impulsivity is very high. Their executive functioning is very low. Their prefrontal cortex, is decreased. Their ability to access their capacity for problem solving, logical and rational decision making are decreased, and people will cope in unhealthy ways when they're feeling unsafe or under threat. So in this way, it's helped me to understand that trauma can be indeed a gateway to crime, you see? And we need to view clients this way in our criminal justice system, with that compassion, knowing that the behavior they have, there's more to it than meets the eye. So I think my background in psychology is the one that has given me that view of our clients. And the second way is that how I look at our justice, the criminal justice system itself, because most and many of our clients experience it as unsafe. In my own observation and listening to the lived experience of justice-involved persons, and even when you look at media portrayals based on true stories. For example, there was a series that was done by Arvidson, When They See Us, and it portrayed this group of kids who went to the justice system. And it's heart-wrenching because it represents how the clients experience the justice system as potentially traumatizing. And this works against us as corrections because we want to rehabilitate an individual, but they do not feel safe in the system. And this affects our ability to gain from the cognitive and behavior interventions and programs that we are giving them. They can't gain from them because all their internal resources are focused on survival. They're not focused on learning and unlearning antisocial behavior patterns and learning more prosocial ones. So you see, that trauma lens helps us. And I think this is the interface of the trauma-informed perspective with human rights, because we want to implement the deprivation of right to liberty as a consequence for breaking the law while upholding every other single fundamental right that the client has as protected by law and international law as well. So we have a duty in corrections to create a safe rehabilitative environment in order to provide the core conditions that are necessary to support personal transformation. And so the trauma lens meets the human rights approach and also meets the concept of dynamic security, because you also want to develop positive relationships that allow for public safety and safe containment, while at the same time facilitating rehabilitation and then eventual reintegration into the community. So trauma-informed perspective from my psychology background also has allowed me to view how we need to create a safe justice system, criminal justice system and correction system that can actually facilitate our rehabilitative aims. And then the last way the trauma-informed perspective has helped me in my work is how I view myself and my colleagues in the corrections and criminal justice field, all of us as actors. When we work in this space, we are exposed on a daily basis to potentially traumatic experiences in our line of work. And our clients are not usually in their best times, nor are they at their best behavior. So the spaces where we work may not be always safe. Another consideration, is, especially for us in the global south, is the ratio of, the criminal justice actor vis-a-vis the client. Sometimes you realize the ratio results in a lot of understaffing. So you're serving a lot of people and you are one, corrections officer or criminal justice worker, and that has a direct impact on us, on our wellness, and that concerns me a lot as a psychologist, as a corrections practitioner, because we need to take care of ourselves, we need to take care of each other, but more than that, we need the organizations where we work, to have this trauma-informed lens so that they put in place mechanisms and structures that support the well-being of staff. When you look at research, even in the global south, you will notice that a lot of correctional practitioners have a lot of mental health issues, wellness problems that are probably coming from trauma at work. So the trauma-informed lens also applies to us as corrections practitioners, and we would do well to have programs that support our well-being. So I've described how my psychology background shaped my approach to corrections, but I think that something that is very important to mention is how or what my psychology background did not give me. Because now, as I got into corrections, I had no in-depth understanding of criminology. So I didn't have the R&R model. I didn't have the Desistance model. So I'm using all the psychology tools and my knowledge, of course, to work with clients, but those critical frameworks were missing until I had the opportunity for further research and, of course, further training. And so this brings it back to your earlier point when you talked about standardization and specific professional training for probation and community corrections and, also just all of corrections generally. We need to invest in a very specific skill set that research has shown is needed and necessary in order for us to be effective in our work. So when we invest in core correctional skills, when we invest in evidence-based practices, the risk-need-responsivity, motivational interviewing, dynamic security, desistance model, trauma-informed training, all this, I think, now builds our skill to a level where we are addressing the needs of our specific population. So, and in my view, this is the way that we can say now we are doing corrections right, when we have that kind of professional specific training for our field.
Boy, so many awesome things I could unpack there, Nancy. But yes, I agree with everything up to and including, as you said, it's almost as if the field of corrections, we've got a pretty good handle on what works, but now it's more a question of looking at who works as far as the hiring and the promoting, and as you described, sort of what they bring to the table as far as that empathy and that understanding of absolute worth and all of the above. I wanted to ask, as you were speaking, you talked about, our roles in corrections, and I've been talking with other guests up to and including when I spoke with Marcus Hodges, we got into this issue of there's an expression, at least in the United States, where probation officers often say, well, I wear two hats. I have two roles. Sometimes it's more law enforcement. Sometimes it's more social work. And I've just really had issues with that because it's really neither. It's both, but neither. And you sort of just described that. It's more about getting at that change agent role, that you have a unique hat, and it's a difficult one because you have to balance those two roles. But yeah, it's not one or the other. It's sort of a hybrid of both. And also, I wanted to thank you, whether you realized it or not, you just gave a ringing endorsement for our TIDES model that we've been working on, our trauma-informed assistance model, because as you said, we my colleague Nicole Kimberly Staley and I realized that there was this void in understanding about not just the role of trauma. For example, there's been trauma-informed care in corrections for a while, but as you just pointed out, it really boils down to, among other things, if that client doesn't feel safe, then none of your cognitive behavioral therapies will have efficacy or have the traction they should, because, not to get too clinical here, but because your client is still back in that brainstem. You've got to get them up into the prefrontal cortex for them to access those abstract thinking thoughts and those problem-solving abilities. And we just don't realize we as the field of probation, that sometimes in and of itself, simply that power differential, I'm the probation officer, you're the client, is traumatizing. I know when we were researching our TIDES model and really going down the rabbit hole of these various theories on, as you just described, trauma, and you framed it as a human rights thing, a lot of the research came out of, for example, war-torn countries or people under extreme human rights conditions. And we sort of had to recalibrate our lens of, well, this would also apply to someone who's been justice impacted for 20 years.
Yeah.
Somebody who was arrested at the age of 13, been through the juvenile detention process, graduated, as we say, to the adult system, on probation revocation, back in jail, off to prison, out on parole. I mean, that journey is traumatizing. And again, you could almost draw these comparisons between someone growing up in extreme weather conditions or a place of war, that if the client's not safe, all of our interventions start with establishing a space of safety. And sadly, we just too often look right past that and go right into what we were trained in the STIX model or whatever, which is awesome. But we wonder why it's not effective, and that's why.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Nancy, it always warms my heart when I hear folks from around the globe talking about risk-need-responsivity or these other foundational skills that we all know work around the world. But I also appreciate how when I talk to our global partners, they bring a little bit different perspective, or they contextualize it just a little bit differently. One of the things that I've learned when I've opened up my international lens is that there's a lot more work being done outside of the United States, at least, around this issue of violent extremism. That's just something that we don't have on our radar here in the United States, but I know it's a big issue around the world. Maybe talk about that and maybe frame it rather within that risk and needs lens, but maybe more broadly around how you apply that R&R lens to violent extremism and what the output of that work perhaps looks like.
Wow, yeah. As you've mentioned, violent extremism is an issue. Yeah, violent extremism is a great issue for us. East Africa, Horn of Africa, it's a challenge that we have to deal with. And I think the R&R model helps us in this work that we continue to do, because it helps us to identify how people get into violent extremism, the pathways into violent extremism, and identify the specific risks factors that are driving them and what the needs they have that are driving them. And in this area, I think someone comes to mind, Professor Dunescu, whom we've worked with in corrections over here. And he's a brilliant mind and a thought leader in the criminal justice area. He's done a lot of work. He's someone I look up to. And I think I've learned a lot from his book and the Correctional Skills Training Kit. And also by following his work, he's led me to really good resources from the Confederation of European Probation and also from the Radicalization Awareness Network. And they have a lot of resources that we can tap into and learn from, and just exchange the information and learn what is happening in Europe and how we can apply it here. But coming back to your question about the R&R model, for us, I think what we have seen here is that there are vulnerable groups, especially the youth. And in community corrections, we will look at prevention, crime prevention. How do we keep these people who are driven either by economic reasons to be susceptible and vulnerable to ideologies or extremist ideologies or behavior? How do we keep them from going further down that pathway? And so our interventions come in so that we are trying to make sure that these vulnerable youth are in school, these vulnerable youth are in vocational training centers, they have a life skill, they have a way to earn a living, they have, just general life skills, emotional skills, and the support that they need so that they are not so vulnerable that they can be recruited into violent extremism. So our work in community corrections is basically on prevention and focusing on at-risk groups and how we can give them different pathways to attain their goals and their dreams and visions in life.
Would you say, Nancy, and this maybe is directed more towards my at least my North American listeners, but is there a parallel to be drawn from the work around violent extremism, and as you mentioned, the radicalization awareness network, and those practitioners here in the United States, for example, that work with street gangs, as we have an issue with here? Do you see some similarities? You mentioned, for example, poor socioeconomic status or poverty or that type of thing, but those same, I could say, pull factors that might entice a youth into a life of extremism or terrorism would also be the same types of variables that we would recognize for our professionals who work with entrenched street gang members.
Yeah, of course. I think there are a lot of similarities because even when you look at it in the East African region, a lot of youth get into this in the context of gangs, and it's not always that you're individually recruited. There's that gang involvement, you see. There's the need to belong and to identify with a cause greater than you. Of course, there are other failing structures like family and community that have left you vulnerable. So I see that as being very similar. And something else that is quite similar is the online space and technology, because now we are looking at how the trends are going, and involvement is going online. It's going to the gaming system. This is where the young people are getting the ideologies from now. This is where recruitment is taking place. This is where constellations are forming. It's going online, and the online space is global. So somebody will be talking from someone in East Africa, and maybe they are in Europe, they're in North America, and they're sharing the same ideas, extreme ones. And the vulnerabilities are the same, whether it's poverty here or poverty there, the fault lines are the same.
You mentioned your love of cognitive behavioral therapies, and I noted a few months back or a few weeks back on your LinkedIn page, you are also commenting on Dr. Banta's post noting the release of the latest edition of the Psychology of Criminal Conduct. Mm-hmm. And speaking of criminogenic needs, and hopefully this is not an oversimplification, but sometimes when I talk to practitioners or audiences, I break down what is commonly referred to as the big four by simply stating, if you can get a handle on your client's thinking and their social support, those other criminogenic needs will fall into place around employment and substance misuse. But too often we neglect to look at those two. But when you were talking about radicalization, I was sort of wondering the same thing. Do you see that as the big two elements? If you can get a handle on your client's thinking patterns and their companions, that's the biggest challenge right there.
Exactly. And I absolutely agree with you. And I was very pleased when we moved from the, big four and central 8 to just seeing all of them as important, because I think the heart of the matter is attitudes. The way you think about everything affects everything, because the way you think affects the people you choose to relate with. It affects your family relationships. It affects whether you value education or you don't value education. It affects your choice of employment, whether you think it's a waste of time and it's taxation and it's capitalism or enriching the few, or whether you think that work is, gainful and meaningful contribution to society and a means to earn your way through life, so attitudes will affect every single factor of your life and every other push factor. So I think we need to focus on the online space because of how much impact it has on attitudes, the thinking patterns. And now we don't have the geographical spaces constraining us anymore, because you just get online and you're in touch with everybody. So if there's a specific attitude on something, it's spreading across everywhere. So I think you're right to say that our focus should definitely be on attitudes when it comes to matters corrections, when it comes to matters how are people getting into the justice system, and also when it comes to other issues like violent extremism. It's definitely the key.
And great insight as far as the current prevalence with online media exposure, whatever that form may be. I think that's something that we really need to be more aware of, because as you've challenged me to think about that, Nancy, if you think about what youth or even adults see online, and you put that against the social learning theory backdrop from which general personality and cognitive social learning theory is anchored, you know, we think traditionally, or as a trainer, I train traditionally when I explain the impact of social learning theory, it's traditionally framed as how you observe the cost and rewards of your parents' behavior or your friends' behavior or your coworkers' behavior. But I don't think as an assessment trainer, I've ever factored in or how you perceive the cost and rewards of online behavior. And that is maybe a brand new landscape that we need to start looking at here. I know you spoke briefly before we hopped online about some work that you've done with Swedish correctional professionals, and I think you were trained a little bit in the STIX model. I've known Dr. Burgone for years, and he told me at one point, Joe, if a practitioner can get their client to understand the thought behavior link, as you said, that concept that your thoughts and only your thoughts drive your behavior, that's paramount. And again, getting them to understand the good news with that is that Mr. or Mrs. Client, you and only you control your thoughts. So you're sort of the master of your destiny. But if we can shift that sort of that locus of control from, oh, it's the crooked police, it's my incompetent attorney, it's my wife who's out to get me, to be more of, I'm the master of my ship here. I know I said a lot there. I'm not sure there was a question in there, but did any of that resonate again, as far as either the online is sort of the new version of social learning theory, and or at the end of the day, it still boils down to getting our clients to understand that their thoughts drive their behaviors?
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Yeah, we need to look at the online angle and see what we can draw from there, because that's something to look at. And you mentioned about our work, of course, in corrections here, and how it's been supported by the Swedish Prison and Probation Service. We've done a lot of work with them that was supported by SIDA, the Swedish International Development Cooperation Agency. And I think their work supported our initial efforts in entrenching evidence-based practices and really spreading training for correction officers in the areas of risk-need-responsivity, motivational interviewing, dynamic security. And also they really supported us now to introduce some interventions that are modeled or adapted from STIX, the Canadian STIX, and co-correctional practices, because we did realize that we were getting very good at assessments and we were getting good at treatment planning, but then we needed to up our game when it came to treatment interventions and tools, and that model came in very handy for that. And also we've been able to do a lot of work with the Raoul Wallenberg Institute of Human Rights, and that has been in entrenching the United Nations Standard Minimum Rules in terms of training officers. And the success of that work has been capacity building in correction staff, because in corrections, the staff are the most important assets that we have. So if we train them well, we get to have a good outcome. And through these trainings, it's very clear that, correction practitioners are willing and able, with the right training, to adopt good correctional practices that are founded on the United Nations Standard Minimum Rules in their daily work. And more than that, it helped us also collaborate between custodial corrections and community corrections, because unlike Western jurisdictions in the global South, and in particular in East Africa, custodial and community correctional services are usually distinct services. So we're not always working together, but these projects were able to bring us to work together, enhancing our collaboration as a result as we work towards the same offender. And through a lot of joint case conferences that we could exchange ideas and best practices for custodial and corrections. And now we are continually moving towards a more collaborative approach in our work together. And also we've seen through this more and more utilization of community sanctions. So that can be the broader impact of the projects, which is really good because we want, to move towards community corrections as a whole globally. And so that is really, really important work that we were able to do.
Nancy, you mentioned custodial corrections, and thank you for making that distinction. Mm-hmm. I've also heard you note dynamic security at least a couple of times. I had the good fortune of doing some training a couple years back in the Middle East around dynamic security with Dr. Sarah Lewis and her great team out of Great Britain, Penal Reform Solutions. But talk about it in the context that you're practicing dynamic security. I think most folks associate that with what we refer to as that Norwegian prison model. But I just see this as the future dynamic security, which is, is more relationship based. Maybe share some of your insights around dynamic security for our listeners who may not be as familiar with that as you and I are.
Oh, thank you so much for asking that. Of course, all this is based on my own personal experience as a corrections practitioner. And my view is that I think globally we are moving from static security where, we rely on, the fences and the technology to contain people and keep them orderly, and moving towards dynamic security, which emphasizes positive relations, with the clients as a means, of course, to knowing what's going on in prison, preventing escapes, but also creating an environment that is safe enough to facilitate our rehabilitative goals and eventual reintegration of our clients. So for me, that's where I find dynamic security very important, because it builds the relationships that are necessary to facilitate effective rehabilitation, because prison is not just somewhere to stay. We have a goal. We want people to learn. We want people to come out of there as better transformed individuals. And I think dynamic security is the way that gives us that avenue to provide the safe environment, the positive relationships that can also drive our rehabilitative goals.
Yes, one of the things I stumbled across when I was researching and then training around dynamic security is what the Norwegians refer to as that principle of normality. Mm-hmm. In other words, the prison experience should be as normal, for lack of a better term, as life on the outside. In other words, the sanction or the consequence or the punishment is being removed from the community, being removed from your family, being removed from your employer. We don't need to add to that and make the situation much worse. Or as our colleague Shad Maruna has pointed out, Joe, you could think of incarceration almost as the ninth criminogenic need.
I absolutely agree.
It's a necessary sanction at a point if you have someone who is so dangerous or so risky or for other reasons needs to be removed from the community. But just realize that comes with a cost, because getting back to social learning theory, if you were to put any of us, pro-social or not, into a custodial setting, we would likely come out more risky. So we just need to understand that it's there, but you almost have to counter that then with even more core correctional skills, even more cognitive behavioral therapies, or in the case of the Norwegians, just instill that sense of normalcy and don't compound it.
Exactly.
Nancy, what are some of the specialized considerations that you take into account when working with youth and children in the justice system? Again, the more I learn about trauma, the more I realize we really do need to sort of rewind that tape even getting back to perhaps looking at prenatal stuff. But I think, we're really lacking on making that front end investment with juveniles. But what is your takeaway on working with youth and children who are just as impacted?
Yeah, I think this is something that is very important because the justice-involved youth and children are a special population, and I think they require a lot of special considerations. And one thing that is very, very important to me and critical is looking at their adverse childhood experiences. I always begin by addressing and assessing for their adverse childhood experiences because research demonstrates that these adverse childhood experiences are more prevalent among the children and youth in the justice system compared to their counterparts in the general population. So by the time a child or a youth are in the justice system, there's probably one or two ACEs that are in the background, or even more than that. And of course, we know that the research has shown the link between childhood trauma and the long-term health and behavior and social consequences, even up to adulthood. So I will look at abuse. Is there emotional, physical, or sexual abuse? I will look at neglect. Is there emotional or physical neglect? I will look at household dysfunction, and these are various things like substance abuse, domestic violence, a mentally ill person, or separation. And those are really critical and also weigh in the trauma-informed perspective, because my primary focus when I see a child or a youth in the justice system is not what did they do, it's how did they get here? Because by the time the child gets into the justice system, so many failures and measures have been passed in between. As a society, we have the role and the duty to provide the conditions necessary for optimal development of our children in pro-social way. So the time they get to the justice system, there's something that is not happening. So there's somewhere that support has not been provided. So I always want to look at adverse childhood experiences. And that, of course, helps me to tailor my interventions, and which will focus on resilience, because you want to build the resilience of this child and the youth to be able to manage and bounce back and rise above whatever present challenges are within their family and community context that, of course, led them to crime, and be able now to move and develop a different, social identity and desist from crime and get into a pro-social lifestyle. So I think resilience is very important, whether it's behavior programs or formal education or vocational training, build resilience. And then lastly, I want to focus on a restorative justice focus with children and youth. And this is very, very important because in my experience, I've realized that justice involved children and youth. Most of the primary and secondary victims are family members or a relative or a neighbor or a community member. So if this child or youth is going back to the community, they need somewhere where they'll be able to reintegrate. So healing these relationships through restorative justice is very critical. And this way we can support the clients, the child's and youth's identity transformation, which will support desistance and also support their redemption narrative and build the social capital that is necessary for them to continue on life on a different pathway. So I think that for justice-involved children and youth, we need to be very specific in what we focus on so that we really help them at early on before they circle back to the justice system.
Nancy, I foresee a follow-up conversation with you and I, because when you were talking and you mentioned, for example, resiliency and identity and social support, those are three of the four pillars of our TIDES model. So we're both on the same page here about sort of the future and taking all these various disciplines and bundling them together, if you will. I also thought of something which is an expression going around now in trauma-informed care circles. But as you said, we need to change that question when talking with our clients from what's wrong with you to what happened to you.
Exactly.
Nancy, look into your crystal ball. Let's imagine you're back on the show in 3 years or 5 years or 10 years. What do you think we might be talking about in the future? What does the field of corrections look like, and or maybe where are you at in your journey? Leave us with a hopeful message moving into the future.
Thank you so much, Joe. I think when I look at the future, I see that probation and community corrections, globally, will have really embraced specific professional training that is integral in us building the skill set that we need to be effective in corrections as a bare minimum, and also embraced and integrated trauma-informed perspectives in our work so that we create safe environments for people to actually heal, to actually learn, to actually go through personal transformation so that they can be the kind of individuals they want to be in the future, successful ones. I think we all want to do great things in life, but some of us never get the support that we need to get there. And so I see us offering more support in more effective and evidence-based ways. And I'm also looking forward to what research will show, because I think research is evolving and leading us in different directions and showing the link between, mental health and criminology, neurocriminology research. So I look forward to that as well. I'm excited for the future.
As am I, Nancy, as am I. Nancy Nungari joining us all the way today from her home in Nairobi, Kenya. Nancy, I truly look forward to speaking with you on the podcast again and or collaborating in some way, shape, or form. Thank you so much, Nancy. Until next time.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure, Joe.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
And there you have it, folks. Another captivating episode of the Criminologist podcast has come to an end. I want to extend my heartfelt gratitude to our incredible guest, Nancy Nungari, for sharing her brilliant insights and experiences with us today. Nancy, your work in implementing the Risk-Need-Responsivity framework in Kenya is truly inspiring. Your dedication to the principles of dynamic security, desistance from crime, and trauma-informed care is making a significant impact on the lives of justice-involved individuals. It is a testament to the power of innovative approaches in criminal justice and the potential for positive change. Your passion for the field is evident, and your commitment to the rehabilitation and reintegration is commendable. Today's episode was indeed special, as we partnered with the American Probation and Parole Association's International Relations Committee. It's a reminder of the importance of global cooperation and knowledge sharing in our mission to strengthen community corrections and reduce recidivism. I'd also like to give a special shout out to our mutual colleague, Professor Iwan Dernescu from the University of Bucharest. It's wonderful to see how you both have collaborated in Kenya, and I've had the privilege of working alongside Professor Dernescu during my annual trips to Barcelona for his International Training School on Core Correctional Skills. It's through partnerships like these that we can make a real difference in the lives of individuals involved in the criminal justice system, no matter where they are in the world. So, as we wrap up this special episode, I want to thank you, our listeners, for tuning in. Your support means the world to us, and we are committed to bringing you more thought-provoking conversations in the future. Until next time, remember that positive change is possible, and together we can continue to build a more just and rehabilitative world. Back next week with a fresh episode. In the meantime, you may contact the show or reach out to us through our website, the Paragon Group, LLC.com, for training or presentations as to core correctional skills, desistance from crime, or of course, our innovative TIDES program model. If you have questions or comments as to this podcast, feel free to contact the show via our email at thecriminologistpodcast@gmail.com. That's thecriminologistpodcast@gmail.com. Remember to follow us through our Facebook and Instagram pages at The Criminologist Podcast. New, fun images are being added all the time to those feeds. You don't want to miss out. We are also on X. Give us a follow at Crim Media Group. That's CRIM Media Group. You may also connect with me, Joseph Arvidson, or Nancy Nungari on LinkedIn, and follow both the Criminologist Podcast and the Paragon Group on our LinkedIn pages. Hey, lastly, if you've not already done so, check out and subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Criminologist, for additional content as to the themes of this podcast. And if you believe in what we're doing, if you're part of the movement, please spread the word, tell a friend or a coworker or a colleague about us. Ask them to subscribe to the podcast, and of course, do so yourself if you've not already done so. And always remember, folks, there's no them, there's only us.
So I feel like through your podcast, I've traveled to Romania, to Ukraine, to Australia, to the UK, and to various parts of the US, and gotten to gain a lot of insights from the experiences and also from the knowledge of the greater international community in criminal justice sector. And also, in addition to that, you feature a lot of people with lived experiences, from the justice sector. And that has given me a real insight into how our clients experience us, and also really anchored my belief that we need a trauma-informed perspective when we work in the criminal justice system, of course.
This has been a special APPA edition of The Criminologist Podcast. Their international relations team looks forward to sharing the insights of other subject matter experts from around the world in future episodes. The Criminologist Podcast is a production of the Paragon Group, LLC. For speaking engagements, interviews, program design, or training opportunities, please visit us at theparagongroup.llc.com. Be sure to give us a 5-star review, and thanks for listening.